Hi there everybody, Alan Denman again. It's Narrowboat Lockdown number 10 and we're very pleased to have with us today John, who designed and installed our water filtration system. Now that video that I did a few weeks ago has had enormous interest, and we've had something like well over 80 responses to it and a lot of questions. So what I've done is I've read through all the questions and comments and I've collated them together to make a list. Yeah, it's very, very thorough, and I'm very pleased to have John here. It's doing a sort of follow-up checkup on our water filtration system to make sure it's working well. So we're going to go through these questions. So let's introduce John.
There you go.
Hi, well, thank you, Alan and Aisha, for having me over today and for organising the video.
Having some bickies.
Absolutely, having some biscuits, and here with my COVID haircut. Not sure it's the best time to be on camera, but here we go. So, Alan,
you just tell me about your background and how you got into designing water filtration systems, because you are a boater yourself.
That's right. So I came to the canal about 7 years ago and immediately loved the community, loved the experience. But a constant frustration was the lack of water. And I started thinking, well, this is crazy because we're surrounded by water. There must be a way of cleaning it to sort of typical domestic levels. And so over a period of, well, years really, it probably took more than 2, almost 3 years to perfect the system. I started cobbling different bits of plumbing together and filters, and experimented with reverse osmosis systems and all sorts of things, spent a fortune, and ended up coming up with with essentially two possible solutions and combinations of different filtration methods in order to arrive at the point where we are now. And yeah, so that's my background.
That's great. So let's run through the questions then. Does this water filtration system have a particular name? Are there different types of filtration systems, or is it all really basically the same principle, and that is you take water and you put it through a series of filters?
There's different ways of filtering systems and filtering water, and a lot of the people watching this video and visiting your blog will be familiar with the term reverse osmosis. This isn't a reverse osmosis system. I don't use reverse osmosis in the process because it's incredibly wasteful. For every 5 litres of water that goes in, you lose 4 litres. It discards about 80% of the water that goes in. And I should say that before you actually get to the reverse osmosis system, the water has to go through quite a few pre-filters up until that point. So it becomes very expensive in terms of the filters which are used before you get to the reverse osmosis system. So if you imagine that you typically use let's say 50 litres of water per day, you'd need to filter something like 250 litres of water down to about 1 micron in order to achieve those 50 litres of water that you could potentially drink if it's been through a reverse osmosis system.
Somebody wrote that they were worried that we were removing all the useful minerals if we were using reverse osmosis, but I guess we're taking some minerals in through the water anyway. Or do you have a comment on that? I remember you saying something about that.
Yeah, I've heard this criticism before of reverse osmosis systems and any filtration system that filters down to a mineral level. And I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but my own opinion on this is that we get our minerals, yes, partly from the water that we drink, but mostly from the food that we eat. Yeah. And really, as long as you have a healthy diet, then then the purity of the water that you're drinking shouldn't really make any, it shouldn't leave you in a state where you're malnutrition because the water has been stripped of certain minerals. So no, that's not something that personally I'm worried about.
So great, thanks. That's really good answer there, John. A lot of people were concerned about bacteria being left in the system, and why didn't we have a UV filter installed? Would you mind just dealing with that and putting these people, their minds at rest?
Sure. So ultraviolet purification is an option, and some of my customers, I have installed ultraviolet filtration, not filtration but purification into the process. It works in an environment where we're filling the main water tank, but in your scenario, the way that we've installed the system is that we've effectively plumbed directly to the taps. Now that would mean that the ultraviolet tube would need to be switched on the whole time, and that obviously, when you live on a boat, you become concerned about power. The UV tubes don't draw a vast amount of power, but they do draw something like 40 watts, which is the equivalent of an old style light bulb, and so that's not really something that you'd want being taken out of your battery bank on a for very long. So we've omitted the UV filtration, UV purification from this installation, but we have installed an ultrafine filter beneath the kitchen tap, so that filters down to 0.2 of a micron. 0.2 of a micron is smaller than almost all bacteria, viruses and cysts, so that should effectively do the same job as the UV.
Great. People are also concerned about pharmaceuticals. People are very aware that pharmaceuticals come into our water supply, and will this system filter out pharmaceuticals as well?
So we've got an array of 5 filters. I don't know actually if you want to focus down on the filter array here. So the first 3 filter for sediments, the 4th filter filters for hydrocarbons, and this last filter that you can see here filters for heavy metals and pesticides. So it's definitely a concern, a valid concern for people, the issue of pharmaceuticals, pesticides, etc., because here we are on the canal, we're surrounded by we've got a lot of farmland along the length of the canal, and so inevitably pesticides do end up in the water, so it's very important that these are filtered for, and the filtration system that we've installed here, it should remove those.
Right, okay. And people asked about the pump as well, whether it was like just a standard pump, whether there's anything special about it. Maybe just could you talk about the pump a little bit and what your experience there is?
Yeah, my experience when I was, I mentioned that I went through a sort of 2 to 3 year process of building my own system for my own boat before I commercialised this, and the weak element in this whole chain is the pump. I think I went through 3, maybe 4 different pumps before I actually found one that worked reliably and was robust enough. The standard pumps, water pumps that you have on your boat that you can buy typically from a marina, the Jabscos, etc., they're not up to the job. Because
why is that?
Because they don't produce enough pressure. Right. So we need quite a lot of pressure to force the water through these filters. Right. Typically you'll have between 25 and 40 psi on a with a typical 12-volt water pump. That's just not enough to get the water through 5 separate, well in this case 6 separate filters.
So what about the power consumption then? If this is a stronger pump, it has to suck the water with more force. How does that affect us as boaters?
So the pump does have quite a high power draw. It's about 180 to 200 watts, which is quite a bit of power, but the pump doesn't run for very long. So the pump is only running for a few minutes each time, and therefore as long as you've got a reasonably a reasonably good battery bank, that shouldn't be a problem.
And what about freezing up in winter? That was we had that question a number of times. How do we protect it?
Yeah, it's certainly something to be concerned about. Your biggest risk in terms of freezing is the extraction tube, which goes in the canal. So the canal doesn't freeze over very often. It's maybe once or twice a year in a typical British winter. And obviously the area that's most at risk is the immediate water, the point where the tube goes into the water and a few millimeters below. So in that scenario, it would be worth removing the extraction tube from the water on the coldest nights, and then returning the tube to the water in the morning. I haven't yet had a problem with my installation or with any of my clients with any of the system freezing up to the point that it's unusable.
Great. Okay. And even the filters, they're not likely to freeze up, really, are they? Because they're probably protected sufficiently from the cold. It never gets that cold, does it?
Well, each of those filter housings holds, quite a few litres of water, so it would have to be very, very cold for them to freeze solid. But that said, it makes sense because they're installed outside. It makes sense to ensure that they're boxed in, and that amongst that boxing there is some insulation, so that just to give them a little bit of extra protection.
And if I can just point out that we have already here, please, started to box it in. We've got some decking. We're going to put some sides in and a front panel. And what we'll do if it gets really icy, we'll wrap some lagging around the pump and the filters as well. So and maybe a hot water bottle as well. What do you think? So I don't think there's any way that they're going to freeze up.
Hang on, Asia here, camerawoman. When I asked John about the question of lagging around your pump, and you don't want to put too much around there, I think, John, is that right?
You don't want to
Otherwise it can overheat or anything around there.
You don't want to put any lagging around the pump itself, because it will overheat. Yeah.
There we go. No hot water bottles for our pump.
No. Okay, so and people did ask me about cost. Do you want to say something about cost, Sean, and give people some sort of, or what they should do, get in touch with you?
Sure. In terms of cost, the system, it depends how it's configured and to what extent we filter, but somewhere between £1,500 and £2,500 for a typical installation. You can get in contact with me via Alan's blog, or you can visit my website, which is waterfreedom.co.uk.
Okay. Any other things that you want to say, John? Is there any other things that perhaps people could have asked and didn't, or anything else that you want to add to that?
Simply, I'd just reiterate the point that for me, creating this system, once I'd got it working properly, and it took a long time, but once I'd got my own system working, it was life-changing, because when you live on a boat, the biggest constraint is water, and most boaters, you will know, they tend to become experts in getting themselves clean in a very, very short shower
with a saucepan.
So yeah, I mean, it's the fact that it gives you an opportunity to enjoy life on the cut, but with pretty much domestic levels of water.
That's fantastic.
So you can have proper length showers, and you can wash up properly. On my boat, I even have a washing machine and a dishwasher. So it's it's not too different from being a landlubber.
Great. Well, I want to say thank you, John. That's really great information. I hope that's answered everybody. There'll be somebody with another question, but I can deal with that through the blog. So thank you very much, and good luck with all your work and installing more and making boaters happy.
Well, thank you for having me here.
A pleasure.